2025 budget make more sense now after scrutiny from the President and his cabinet? Let's ask Sonny Africa, the Executive Director of IBON Foundation. Welcome back to The Big Story, Sonny.
Hi, Gretchen, Cousin Ed, and Pauline. Happy New Year. Happy.
Full disclosure, magpinsan kami.
Yeah, Ed, be nice.
Well, finally, we have a signed budget on December 31, day before the year ends. And the last time you were here, you were raising several issues on it. They said they were conducting, or Malacanang said they were conducting a thorough review of the budget. So, first question, are you happy with the 194 billion pesos decrease or vetoed line items?
Okay, it's kind of surprising it made such a big deal out of the president working so hard, because in the end, what really mattered was that super tiny cut in the Department of Public Works and Highways budget. It seemed like the only objective of that, whatever cramming they did, was to try to make it more constitutionally compliant. I think they failed in that regard, but it's not a better budget. It's an attempt to be constitutionally compliant, but the pork, over 90% of the insertion on the DPWH budget is still there, actually. So I think it's not actually a much better budget. It was damage control. I think they just want to get out of the way so that all the politicians can start campaigning properly in the first quarter. They should have spent more time on a proper budget rather than rush it the way they did.
Your cousin Ed was saying a while ago that yung actually na nabawas talaga sa budget ay 26 billion lamang. Dahil yung 168 billion ay galing pa sa unprogrammed appropriations na lalagyan mo lang ng pera kapag ikaw ay may savings. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, they bloated it's a bloated accomplishment. The 168 billion in unprogrammed appropriations, again, that will only be covered if they are proper savings, new revenues, new sources of revenues. The only real substantial cut they made was 26 billion, and it's not substantial. It's a super tiny cut. 26 billion is less than 10% of the 289 billion that they inserted. So basically, pork was kept. It was just basically an effort to try to squeeze in to try to squeeze the DPWH budget, so it's not so obviously a pro-infrastructure budget. But I think our point is, even if they added all the major education sectors, agencies, SECs, TESDA, CHED, and the DepEd. Actually, if you add all the infrastructure agencies, DPWH, DOTR, and Department of Energy, infrastructure does still get the biggest share of the budget. And I think that is something that can be questioned. There are no hard and fast rules into what's defined as infrastructure, and actually what's defined as education. But I think it can still be questioned that not just this administration's final budget, but even the president's budget submitted in July, but actually most budgets submitted since at least the end of the Aquino administration have violated the constitutional provision on the highest priority being given to education.
I think even the budget for the construction of school buildings ng DPWH was also added on dun sa education sector budget. So I suppose you might call it a creative accounting in a way. We were talking kanina to Budget Undersecretary or Assistant Secretary De La Vega. Ang sabi niya, in answer to the two questions over constitutionality that have been raised, number one, education having to have the priority. Number two, no increase budget. Congress should not be increasing the budget submitted by Malacanang. They presented arguments kanina. Okay, now let's begin with the last one. On the question of whether or not Congress can increase the budget submitted by Malacanang, their argument now being that so long as hindi gumalaw yung final approved budget beyond what was proposed by Malacanang, which is a 630 or 6.3 trillion, that's not increasing. In other words, they're looking at the aggregate. They're not looking at the departments or the sectors. That's their first argument. What do you think of that?
I think the argument only holds, especially if they use the unprogrammed appropriations as an excuse as not being part of the budget. It is true. They did not add, in this particular case, they actually reduced the budget. And again, they reduced the budget specifically of the DPWH, just to be able to squeeze past the DepEd, CHED, SUCs, and test the budget. So I think if it's a question of adding, they didn't do anything unconstitutional because they didn't add; they only vetoed. But I think that the Supreme Court decisions that are pending on how to consider unprogrammed appropriations, I think it will resolve whether these huge increases in the last 5 years in unprogrammed appropriations should be counted as an abuse of authority by Congress.
Okay, Sonny. Well, let's talk about the controversial ACAP. It will be.
Can I add something
Sure,
quickly?
sure. Go ahead.
Super quickly. I did listen to the press briefing earlier this morning. They like throwing around the idea that school buildings are part of the DepEd budget, of the DPWH budget. But I don't know if they answered the question, Ed, when you asked him kanina. Kasi as far as I know, when we looked at the President's budget submitted to Congress in July, the school buildings are only 2.5% of the 1.5 trillion infrastructure program. So it was barely 38 billion, I think. So I think even that claim, we should interrogate that a bit, because if they throw the idea that, oh, infrastructure also includes school buildings, it does technically, but it's a minuscule portion of the infrastructure budget. And literally 2.5% of a 1.5 trillion infrastructure outlay. That's not actually very much, and it's not going to change the picture that if you add the DPWH, the DOTR, transport and energy budgets, the three main infrastructure agencies, they have been getting much more than education. All education, not just the four big ones, even the sort of tiny ones, PSI, Local Government Academy, PNP Academy, all of that. Even if you add all of those, infrastructure definitely gets the most in the past maybe 8 or 9 years of budgets.
Okay.
Yeah, Sonny, I wanted to ask you about the controversial ACAP program. It will be staying in next year's budget. It's actually one of 12 government programs that will be subject to what they call conditional implementation, meaning it will be vetted by now the DSWD, DOLE, and NEDA. In your opinion, is that a good remedy? I mean, does it remove or is it enough to address these patronage-driven insertions?
I think it's a question of how transparent they will be with these criteria. It's very easy to publish criteria that's supposed to be implemented, but if the government, the national agencies like the DSWD, if they don't publish exactly who received those handouts and what concentration in congressional districts and even maybe senatorial bulwarks, I think we won't be able to have confidence that claim that it's going to be conditional will mean anything. I think the bottom line is we do know exactly. I think Senator Grace Poe did slip when she said that, oh, it's 5 billion for the Senate, 21 billion for Congress. I think that actually said a lot. I think it's the most dangerous thing. We can operate with some formality, pretending that there's the controls, the mechanisms for accountability in place. But in practice, I think any respectable, honest budget watcher, even within the government, will know all of these are subverted in practice. And I think we get no assurance at all from that claim that, oh, it's going to be conditional. We don't actually think that there's much to be said for that.
Actually, we were talking to Asek De La Vega kanina about it. We asked in particular, dun sa final approved budget, paano naka-specify kung magkano yung kanino pagdating sa ACAP. Di ba? Remember, 5 billion versus 21 billion. Would that be in the budget? Sabi niya, no, it's not in the budget. It's a one-liner for ACAP. It doesn't go into the details as to who recommends what. So, going to that, it doesn't look like that's going to be in the law as to which chamber gets to recommend how much. Baka nasa usap-usapan lang yan behind the scenes. But my question is this, okay, we've been so focused on ACAP, and rightly so, but a lot of people have also missed out on another ayuda that's prone to patronage, which is AIX. And I think that's even bigger, if I remember right, parang 30 plus billion yung AIX proposal in the 2025 budget. I don't know if that's changed kasi I haven't seen the paperwork yet. Pero even AIX seems to be driven by patronage. If you do a simple Google on AIX distributions, you'd get senators distributing AIX.
Yeah, I think we have to start from an important premise. The reality is that poverty is increasing. It has been increasing since the start of this administration. Households without savings have been increasing, anywhere from honestly, 18 to 20 million Filipinos should be considered poor, low income, and vulnerable. So the reality is that tens of millions of Filipinos, especially with the high prices the last couple of years, do need emergency assistance. I think the problem here is that the malice of yung mga trapo exploiting poverty to cement their patronage, that isn't a reason to deny assistance. It's a reason to disconnect ayuda from the trapos and for social protection to be what it should be. It's a right assumed by government. It's not charity with money that isn't even yours. So I think what's the best attitude towards AIX and ACAP? First, if you accept that people do need that kind of ayuda, the problem is not the ayuda being used, it's not ayuda being dispensed. The problem is ayuda being connected to the patronage motivations of politicians. And the best way to do that is make it illegal for any politician to be associated with these programs. Like I said, any sort of claim that the politician that is dispensing this money is not even theirs, make that an administrative concern. Make sure there are mechanisms that when someone goes to the DSWD, ask for assistance, they don't need an endorsement from the governor of the congressman. Make it actually illegal for congressmen and governors to have these endorsement letters. And I think once that connection between ayuda and patronage is broken, ayuda will become the real social protection measure it should be, and it's not going to be used again maliciously, especially come election time. Mechanisms can be put in place, but the thing is, as long as it's discretionary and the government is so careful to make sure that legislators have a say in it, I think that is going to be a problem. And I think one important point, there are a lot of mechanisms in place right now to hide the amount of pork in the budget. And I think in the pre-PDAF Supreme Court decision time, it was quite easy to see what the soft pork and hard pork was. When that Supreme Court decision came out, it didn't do away with pork. It did away with the pork as the old system, but moved it to the budget preparation phase. And I think that's a problem because the more hidden pork is right now, the harder it is to complain. We actually should be we welcome the BICAM debacle because parang nasilip natin just how insatiable politicians can get when it comes to pork. But I think we have to stress it wasn't just the BICAM that was a problem. The budget process, even before the president submits it to Congress, pork is folded into it. That is something is where I think the focus of attention should be because we're not fixing anything by the BICAM and the president's veto did not even fix yung garapal na pagdagdag ng almost 290 billion pesos in the BICAM.
But Sonny, let me just squeeze in one more thing. The DSW told us before that there is a mechanism that should prevent politicians from having a hand in distributing ACAP and AX. But in was it November or September, 150 congressmen decided upon Davao City to distribute AX and ACAP, more than 1 billion distributed by legislators.
Oo nga, kasi in the end, the DSWD is always scared that a legislator can interrupt their funding. And there is always the fear when come the budget hearing time, the moment in the sun of an agency where it's DSWD or DPWH, if they were cooperating in that informal backdoor shady transaction with the legislator, they're also afraid that their legitimate budgets would be cut or there'd be some sort of interference, especially from the powers being Congress. And I think that sort of abuse of the budget for self-serving patronage, I think that's something that must be corrected. And the only way really to do that is have more mechanisms to publicize this. I mean, if the ACAP process is supposed to be conditional, they should make it part of the process, publish all the beneficiaries, make it available for the public, especially at the local level, those who know who's on the ground, make it public, make them accountable. The 4Ps did that. So that's why the 50 billion cut in the 4Ps actually bypasses a very comprehensive mechanism, a comprehensive database of people in need. And that's the way, it's not perfect, and it's 4.3 million beneficiary families, but it's something that at least it's a big step forward to those who want to check, is this money going to the intended beneficiaries? And the AIX and the ACAP, unfortunately, are completely discretionary right now.
Taking a look at the history of ACAP, it actually started in the pandemic through DOLE. It was a DOLE program, and then it was transitioned into DSWD. Noong una, ang tawag sa kanya ay one-time financial assistance, para sa mga kapos ang kita. Pero ngayon, pag tinignan mo yung memorandum, merong rice assistance, medical assistance that can reach up to 150,000 pesos. There's funeral assistance up to
assistance.
50,000 pesos. Food assistance up to 10,000, cash relief up to 10,000. And yung mga most of the services can be availed once every 3 months. Ibig sabihin pwede
Oo
may
nga.
recurrence no pagtanggap ng pera.
Actually, napansin namin ang style talaga para matago ng mga politiko yung kamay nila dun sa pag-dispense niyan, in-overwhelm tayo with mga numbers and figures eh. Parang actually, administratively, if anyone had the authority to go to COA, for instance, if they had the wherewithal to actually go through all those files, they could actually piece things together. But the thing is, if it's the information is technically there, information could be had, but for outsiders, whether it's media or civil society or any other watchdogs, it's just practically impossible to get your hand on all this information. So I think part of the government responsibility should be, in terms of freedom of information, also ensuring that the information, the data is processed to become information. Kumbaga, don't just say, oh, in general, we can give you that. They don't even give you that now. So I think it's a two-step approach. Give access to that data, but also use the government resources to process that data into information that will be verifiable and can be vetted by people on the ground, by independent watchdogs, also by media and the general public. And that's something that I think they're very careful, even the infrastructure projects. In all honesty, most infrastructure projects are geotagged. If someone had, in a few million pesos to set up an agency to audit all the infrastructure projects with access to the data, they could actually do that, but it's just practically impossible. So the government is overwhelming us with data to deny us information. And I think that's something that an outsider, not enough resources, will actually have the wherewithal and means to process properly and make sensible conclusions.
With the president not vetoing the ACAP and also taking a look at the unprogrammed appropriations, it increased from 158 billion to 531 billion in Congress. Tapos ang tinapos doon 168 lamang. So ngayon 363 na siya from 158.7 na initial proposal. I mean, with the president not vetoing the ACAP and that one, would you say that all of this has his nod? And the second question is, I guess, what can we do about it now that the GAA has been passed? What is there for us to do to be able to contest this, all the unconstitutional things that are in the budget? What is in our power?
Yeah. Well, to start off with, of course, the president, I thought, had micromanages things. I mean, there's a lot of, information to process. I think, of course, we have to make, as a starting point, the president crafts the budget. He has all his, his staff, the staff work to be done for him. So the part that was folded into the budget of the president submitted to Congress, that's on the president's account. So the fact that there are literally hundreds of billions of pesos in pork, both soft and hard, most of it informal, that's on the president's account. What the BICAM did, it just, again, it was so garapal. I think I think it's a welcome development that they were so greedy, so felt such impunity they could do that. At least it drew attention to just the tip of the iceberg of a pork and patronage-driven budget. So for me right now, what can be done about that? Well, in principle, the budget is there. Unfortunately, it's been reenacted. We still do think that a complete veto would have been better. Work with the enacted budget for maybe 2 or 3 months, and then pass a final proper budget that went through all the transparency mechanisms that could be done. That was the ideal. But now that the budget is already there, I don't think there's any room for working within that budget because it was very bad to begin with. It was made worse by the BICAM. It wasn't fixed at all by the president's veto. So I think that's our original sin that we have to grapple with right now. What can we do? I think not let it slide. I think we should demand a lot of transparency, not just regarding the ACAP, but I think a lot of transparency, especially regarding that still the remaining 90%. I mean, by our last count, there must be at least about 200 billion pesos in insertions by the BICAM. I mean, let's keep an eye on that. I think the demand for more data, more transparency, more accountability has to come from the outside. And this is something that, when the new year comes, hopefully we won't forget about it. I think they're banking on this controversy sort of
Dying down.
softening because the elections are coming up because people were distracted by that circus. I think that's a very cynical approach to the budget, but I think it's on us, the media, the public, keep the pressure on and really just demand more transparency about how our public funds are spent. And I think the last point, it's so crazy. I don't know if you notice, it's so easy for the government to increase pork barrel funding for pork barrel projects, for big infrastructure projects that benefit big corporations. Pero parang butas ang karayom to get more money for social services, for even social protection, social welfare. I think that sort of attitude has to be corrected. Let's look beyond these, huge billions that seem like a lot. If you look at the need, the government is not giving enough for the people, for agriculture, for industry. And I think that is something that's a long-term battle we have to keep waging.
I like how you describe the budget as an original sin that needs to be corrected. Well, we do wait for the coming year to see what else could happen to the budget.